Good evening, everyone. So, welcome to the Morehouse Center for Excellence in Education. This is our Explore Week. I am Nina Gilbert. I am the director for the Morehouse Center for Excellence in Education. We're so excited about the work we're doing at Morehouse. The center was launched in the fall of 2019, so this is our first full year, providing opportunities for students who are interested in exploring all of the opportunities and the pathways that will lead them into the education sector. So we have students, regardless of their major or discipline, who are interested in making impact in education, who will come through the center. We will start certifying teachers, we hope, by this time next year. And in the meantime, students from various disciplines and majors are able to engage and partner with us to understand how their major, how their discipline intersects with all of the various roles and careers in education. And that's what we're doing over the next few weeks, introducing students and the Morehouse community to our elite pathways. Our first pathway is Explore, where we will talk to trailblazers and revolutionaries in education who work outside of the classroom, but do work that impacts teaching and learning every single day. And those roles could range from policymakers to researchers to journalists. And then in the coming weeks, we'll look at the other pathways, which include leadership, innovation, teaching, and those who work in the family, community, and engagement sector. So at this point, I am going to turn this webinar over to our amazing scholars, Mr. Alan Dunnigan and Latrell Harris.
Yes, hi, my name is Latrell Harris. I'm a senior physics major from Marietta, Georgia, attending Morehouse College. I'm here on behalf of the Morehouse Center for Excellence in Education, where we aim to build a new pipeline of educators through the 5 elite pathways: Explore, Lead, Innovate, Teach, and Engage. And this week is our Engage Week. Explore Week, I'm sorry. I will turn this over to Alan so he can introduce our guests for tonight.
Thank you, Latrell. Thank you, Dr. Gilbert. First off, I would like to say welcome to everyone. Thanks for coming out tonight. Like Latrell said, I'm Alan Dunnigan. I'm a freshman finance major as well as a Bonner Scholar from Cincinnati, Ohio. And I'm one of the co-hosts for tonight's event. I'm also one of the leaders for the Explore Pathway Week. And a little bit of what Dr. Gilbert touched on, the Explore Pathway Week harps on the idea of advocacy, researching, and policymaking, and which is a reason why we've decided to have Dr. Blair as one of our speakers for tonight. The Explore Pathway Week really, and we're bringing this event on to really bring awareness to the way education intersects with researching and advocacy, as well as policymaking. And a little bit about Dr. Blair before we get on with our conversation. He was a Shiloh High School grad here in Georgia, as well as he went to get his bachelor's from Harvard and his master's degree from Stanford University. He went on and taught calculus and geometry at Kipp High School, and he also did policy making for the Obama campaign. Mr. Blair was also reached national attention when he became the first Black man, the youngest Black man, as well as the first openly gay person on the Gwinnett County School Board. Thank you, everybody, and please welcome Everton Blair.
Welcome, Mr. Blair.
Thanks, y'all. Good to be with y'all.
All right, so for our first question, Everton, I take it that I understand that your mother was a Harvard graduate, as well as you went to go into Ivy League schools yourself. Could you talk to me about a little bit of that relationship between you two? Was it always an expectation for you to go to the Ivy League? Did she really challenge you in school? Could you talk to me about that?
Yeah, sure. It really wasn't anything that was ever stated. And in fact, I almost didn't go to Harvard because she did. But my experience was actually just at Shiloh, the school environment changed so much. And I had a lot of teachers that knew me and knew my work ethic and believed in me and encouraged me to do big and great things. But then I had a lot of counselors that also didn't really understand some of the goals that I had set for myself, and weren't aware of just like how hard I had been working over my 4 years. And so there was a combination of encouragement and discouragement there, but I just threw my head out and did a lot. Like many of you all just applied to a whole bunch of schools, that some of which I really should have just saved the application fees. And then I did some visiting with the schools that I did get into, and it was a pretty clear decision once the financial aid came in and the experience I had, that it was going to be a pretty well-rounded experience. And I'm looking back on it, I definitely made the right choice for me, but it is not an easy one for everybody to make.
That's a very interesting story. So during your time at Shiloh, were you always interested in mathematics? What made you pursue that at the undergraduate level? And after that, could you tell us a little bit about like your journey just from mathematics into the educational sector? Like what made you decide to go that route?
Yeah, math was always something that came quickly. It was an interest early on, I'd say even like first, second grade. But interesting, I had no intention of doing anything with it long term or even getting involved in education then. I wanted to be a judge at one point, a paleontologist at another point. But I did take the accelerated math track, and there was nothing left for me to do my senior year of high school. So my AP calculus teacher, my junior year, I basically asked her, like, could I just teach one of your sections as a senior? And she said, yeah. The only alternative was to like take Calc 3 at Georgia Tech, which some students chose to do, but the commute and missing all like half the school day, and I was a student leader, it just didn't really work out in my schedule. So I took the initiative to just become a teacher early. And it was really just, I didn't want to be rusty when I got to college. I enjoyed calculus, and I'd actually never had a math class, or I hadn't had a math class with people who were actually in my grade in like 4 years. So it was a whole bunch of just kind of very casual factors that led me to do that. And then I fell in love with teaching, and that's where like I did some undergraduate summers where I was doing this program called Crimson Summer Academy in college. And then I did the Teach for America internship over the summer and started getting involved in education policy. And that's kind of where it all flowered, was from the first experience that was just me trying to keep my math skills tight.
Mm-hmm. So what was it in particular about teaching that you fell in love with?
It's the moment that you finally get through to a student and they get it. And they can articulate back to you the rationale behind a mathematical principle, or like show you that they have fluency in some mathematical practice, where you have a moment where you feel the influence of the work that you just put in. And you know that, at the beginning of the lesson, they didn't know how to do this. And at the end of the lesson, now they do. Mm-hmm. And that impact, I think, is hard to find that quickly at such a young age as an adult coming out of college. There are many jobs where, like, at best, your source of impact is like closing a big deal or making a decision on that, where you're still working with a whole bunch of other people to do. But, as a teacher, you're the CEO of your classroom. And you have the single-handed influence over multiple people at the same time. And so I got a rush out of that, like that feeling of just like, I'm making a difference. And this is something that I know that I'm able to do in an effective way, and getting better at it over time. And then that's what led me to want to keep doing it.
Okay. So I take it that at Harvard and Stanford, majority of the population was white America, or it wasn't African American.
Overwhelmingly so, yes. Big difference from Shiloh.
So with that being said, and given that only 2% of American teachers are Black men, did that ever discourage you in a way to change your narrative of thinking?
You know what's interesting? Shiloh was an all-Black school, or a very predominantly Black school, but we didn't have a lot of Black teachers. And so I think I didn't even really think about that until I became a teacher, just like how few Black men there are in the profession. But then when I was a teacher, KIPP had done this huge initiative to bring parity to their teacher force. And I actually was not the only Black math teacher at KIPP. And my second year as a teacher, there were 5 math teachers, 4 of us were Black. And so I've had these really polar experiences where I've like lived as a student what I think most of our experiences are, with mostly white women as our teachers, and especially in the public K-12 system. And then in my teaching experience, I had many more just colleagues that were Black, and even many Black male teachers. For me, I think that it was the reinforcement in undergrad, though, where I was seeing how few math professors I had that looked like me, and not able to connect to the principles. And for the first time, actually having like a really struggling. Like I didn't just get the math concept off top because it wasn't given to me in the way that I was used to for 13 years. So I would go to office hours, and the professors are like the Nobel laureates who did the papers, but they can't break it down. And so I would walk out of office hours still scratching my head and frustrated, and like, why can't they just explain it better? I think it really incumbent upon me to try to do something to be the face of what I think math instruction could do and be and look better. But kind of piggyback into the experience as a teacher, when I started doing research on just the general state of teacher diversity and how few Black men there are in the profession, that 2% figure is real, and in many places it's 0. And I think that is regionally something that we can all do something to address. The biggest thing to do is create pipelines like the one that you all are, where you're giving people exposure to the profession and connecting them with folks who have done the work, and then building a support system for them to stay in the work, because teaching is difficult. And many Black men with college degrees who are smart and capable to be teachers have a lot of other jobs that they could be doing. And so it's a combination of the supports that the industry needs to put in place for those people to thrive, but then also what we can do to hold each other up when the going gets really tough, to remind us of the importance of the work.
Wow. So I'm following your storyline, and it seems like you went from a predominantly Black high school, right, to a smaller population in undergraduate and graduate school, to an even smaller population in your teaching career, and then you finally end up at Gwinnett County. All right. So Gwinnett County has never had a Black member on its school board ever. What inspired you to run against a longstanding incumbent, and what challenges did you face?
A lot of the like revolutionary or glass ceiling shattering things I've done have actually just been out of frustration. Like whenever I see something and the thought crosses through my mind, like it shouldn't be this way. I just have to think about what could be done to have it not be that way. And so it's really not that complicated. I just was upset. I saw that we had never elected a person of color in the most diverse school system and the largest one in the state. And I was just like, that's ridiculous. So somebody has to do something to change that.
Can you share how long the good doctor had been on the board? He represented your district.
Yeah, my predecessor served for 24 years. And in fact, the board had experienced no change since 2006. And so, coming back in 2017, I'm looking at folks who I'm thinking, okay, it's been 9 years since I've been out of high school. Surely things have changed. Let me see what's going on in the county and just to see how I can get involved. And this is coming off of like feeling like I'm in an echo chamber in cities like DC and LA, doing really big work, but not feeling like I knew the community and knew the faces and had connections to families, and just wanting to get back involved. And I went to the first school board meeting, and the entire meeting went by without a single mention of instruction. And there was not a single voice heard from a teacher or a student in the entire board meeting. I also looked at the board and realized that like the youngest board member was 60. It was an all-white board. They'd all been serving for more than 14 years. It was just all these things that are just like, we have we're a county of 1 million people, and 76% of our students are of color. There has got to be a better way for us to represent the current and changing needs of our communities than to be just like this very monolithic voice of folks that are saying essentially the same thing. And so my initial concern was that there wasn't enough of the educative voice in the space. And then I think that the identity, just the representation piece, was what came to my fore. Where it was like, this is also crazy that we at our big age had not yet done what I think we should have already seen in the county. And that's, it took 200 years, but I'm glad that we finally were successful, and we'll be even more. I'm the first, but definitely not the last.
Love to hear it.
So you tell me that because of your frustration, your anger is the reason that you went out to try to make a change. Do you still feel some of that frustration now, seeing that you're only the one and only Black man in the room?
Yeah, so part of that is school board races are kind of sleepy, right? And so they're hard races to follow because the districts are drawn in a way where most people don't know who their board member is. They're at the bottom of the ballot. Most folks don't even know like when their election is. They do staggered terms, so about half of the board is elected for a term on some years, and then another almost half will be elected the next time. And it's just like so underpaid that it ends up privileging a very specific group of folks who have the flexibility and the resources to be able to do it. And in a county as big as Gwinnett, where we only have 5 board members, that means that I myself have 250,000 constituents. In order to run that type of a campaign, you got to do mailers, some people do yard signs, t-shirts, like just all the things involved with running a campaign are expensive. And at the same time, like when you think about giving money to a politician, you're probably going to think governor, president, senator first, and they're going to get the big dollar contributions. The person who actually has the greatest impact on your life is the person way, way, way down the ballot, and people are less likely to give to them. And so, the combination of all those factors, I think, leads it to be something that's really hard to do. The frustration was very challenging, but I think now we're seeing a much different reaction. We're seeing a much different reaction to and interest in local races. And so I'm not super frustrated with where we have come and the increase that I've seen, especially in Gwinnett. Like, folks know who I am and they know who their board members are, whether they agree with them or they don't. And I appreciate that. Like, I have some constituents that didn't vote for me and don't agree with what I do and don't agree with my positions. But because I've been able to bring to the forefront this public discourse and amplify the fact that this is even an elected body, I think it creates a much more healthy dynamic where people can engage in the policy matters that affect themselves, their children, and their communities. And I, just sharing a little bit about 2020, of our 5 school board seats, 3 are up this year. And so, in a month, we're going to have some new board members.
So you said that sometimes some of your constituents don't really agree with you. I remember, I looked on YouTube about one of your school board meetings, and that you were the only one in the whole meeting to really not want the students to go back due to the COVID and all that. And to a certain extent, I sort of disagree with you, because I've been online for half of my senior year and most of my freshman year right now. And I take it that I'm not really learning as much. I'm really just turning in assignments. So I feel like for about 6-7 months, I haven't learned anything during the school system. But to go back to you, you were the only one in that meeting that said that you didn't want the students to go back. I'm pretty sure that took a lot of courage. And after that meeting, one of your fellow board members said some pretty nasty things about you. Can you tell me how you felt in that moment?
Well, in the moment where I spoke up, I was actually just kind of shocked that we weren't saying what was truly on our minds. And there was a reckoning that we all needed to do where we admitted that, even if we were confident that the virus and the pandemic was not going to cause significant illness or fatality in our community, like we weren't even saying that. We were just acting like everything was normal. And so my issue was, I obviously disagree with my colleagues, but we're not even willing to, we were about to end the meeting, not even having the very important, it was like the elephant in the room. The entire world is in a crisis, and we're just going to sit here and go through this meeting like nothing's happening. And so I didn't even have formulated thoughts at the time, but I just spoke up and said, I'm surprised we're not doing anything. We're not talking, like we've not mentioned anything. And I think that it was taken sourly because here I am, the new guy, the young guy, this, the that, and saying all this stuff that is seemingly cantankerous, but I just literally I'm shocked at the illogic of the moment. That said, afterward, I made very clear what my position was. But even before the meeting, everybody knows my position because I just put it on Facebook or Twitter or whatever. And it was that, like, we need to get our testing capacity revved up. We need to have the case count up below a certain amount. We need to wait until Labor Day so we can at least figure out, like, as this thing is already sloping downward, let's get it to a point where the community spread is all of these factors that every rational school board in the country is doing and what the CDC is literally corroborating. And so because we hadn't even had that conversation yet, it just felt like it was unreasonable for us to be trying to just act like everything was normal. Eventually, we did both delay the school year and go to virtual and provide an option for parents. And that, I think, was a move in the right direction that would not have happened were I not to have spoken up in the way that I did when I did. So I have no regrets. The moment, I think, was really important. I did not choose to be a school board member to, navigate a pandemic, but none of us did. And so the moment calls for, I think, true leadership. And that's what I felt like I tried to do in that moment. The comments and stuff that happened, I'm actually over it. So I don't need to talk about it anymore.
Beautiful. And just from this conversation, I could just tell that you speak from the heart. So sometimes that may be planned or maybe unplanned. So just right now, like currently working as a school board member, what are some things that you're currently working on? What are some things that are on your heart?
So the only actual enumerated and fiduciary responsibility that any local school board has is to pass the budget. We could go to the meeting and just basically check off everything else, but like every year, every time, every school board must pass a budget. There are some other responsibilities, right? Like hiring and firing a superintendent is a board responsibility. It doesn't happen every year. Land purchasing, any personnel matters, serving as like the appeals board for anything like that. And then student discipline. Those are all things that occur, but they're not every time at a given time every year. And so this next budget is going to be a mess. And the thing that I'm focused on is how to make sure that if we have to make cuts, that they're done as equitably and as forewarned as possible, so that we as a system can take the change and deal with it in a productive way. That we are forecasting for what our post-COVID-19 needs will be. And then that we are being vigilant over the experiences that our students are having, whether they are currently in person or virtual, and creating stopgaps and interventions to meet their needs when they do all eventually return back in person. And then we have like the safety protocols and the spacing and the community guidance and in place to make sure that when everybody comes back, we've done so in a way that keeps everyone safe. Mm-hmm. We're not doing enough of that conversation right now. And I am very concerned about where state revenues will go, where the economy will take us. Like all of those things will have an impact on what our tax revenue base is, which then has an impact on what we can do with our money for public schools. And if we are not talking about that and stating like, what are our non-negotiables? What are the things we're going to make sure we have? It could be any number of situations where you now went from like an already large class size to now there's still some residual effects of the pandemic. You're trying to socially distance, but now you got to cut staff, and now you have way more kids And it's just all of these things that are just really, really problematic. So top of mind right now for me is to create the most equitable procedure for us to, one, take stakeholder input from teachers, students, and community members in what they find to be the most pressing needs for our next year's budget, and then to put that process in place early enough where we're not at the last minute trying to like beg the feds for money and like get some other stuff and dip into our rainy day fund and go into debt to just open school as usual.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like we have our work cut out for us. To
Definitely
say the least.
do.
Yeah. So what about on the local and national level? Like, what are some policies in education we as somebody that's not on the school board, what should we be paying attention to and looking out for?
Yeah, so there was a whole bunch of money that was going to go to local entities from the federal government. It was called the HEROES Act, and it passed the House, which is in Democratic control, but it did not pass the Senate. And I think that we could be continuing to push our federal legislators to do more to help our local groups, to just make sure that we have all the money that we need in small and large school systems to meet what the new needs will be, and to make sure that, especially in states that don't have as much revenue, that we can bring everything back to normal. And we're going to need some extra money for that.
So this time we open up to any additional questions. If anybody wants to ask questions in the chat.
So before we look at the chat, I have a question for you as a former educator, because you're a current educator as well, just in a policy role. Once an educator, always an educator. What advice would you have for someone like me who is tasked with creating this groundbreaking educator prep program to make sure that we are creating the pipeline that districts need? What are some of the recommendations and suggestions that you may have, both from a policy level, but also as a former educator? What do our Black males need to be able to do? And what type of personal and professional tools do they need to make sure they maintain or strengthen their efficacy and resilience so that they can stay in the field for as long as they would like and make the impact that they would like?
Great question. I would say that there is a loss in the profession, or an area for growth in the profession, for us to be really critical about really critical race theory as it relates to the teaching profession. And I can think of no better way than the most underrepresented groups to be leaders in that work. And I think that that's something where there's an intersection that most of the folks, by virtue of not having the experience, cannot speak to. And so I think there will be increasing leadership opportunities in school districts, whether through their equity departments that they're forming, or through these kind of coalitions, post Black Lives Matter, about like what it actually means to teach in a culturally responsive way. Absolutely. And because there is not a lot of, there's a lot of research, but there's not a lot of practice to lean on in the field, there's probably a cool moment where you can be building that and helping students as they become teachers do their practica, but then also figuring out what it looks like to interrogate a curriculum for cultural sensitivity and like racial bias. And then how you as a first year teacher might, advance some sort of like leadership group that helps to make changes. There's a moment that's happening in Gwinnett too, where there are these kind of pop-up groups that are forming that are taking on the title of equity and justice. So there's like an educator group, there's a parent group, and then there's 2 student groups. And there's a lot of really cool ideas that are happening there, but there's like not an organism for them to collaborate and hold shared views, really. So I've been thinking about, just as a board member, how to do that, which I think is going to be relatable, because you as, grooming future teachers will have to kind of square that same circle. and like where teachers fall even in the greater decision making of like what equity looks like in the public classrooms of the next decade. So I would say like not just the being the best teacher and preparing to be the best teacher you can, but then bringing in that like cultural responsiveness.
Thank you so much for that. That confirms our work. We do have a framework that has at its foundation and core critical race theory. That's a core component to our conceptual and theoretical framework. So,
yeah,
thank you.
That sounds like it affirms it for sure.
Absolutely.
And while we're about to jump into the questions from the chat, I just want to extend a thank you, Everton, for just taking the time out of your busy schedule to be here with us. So the chat's blowing up right now. So one of the questions is, what was your experience like at Harvard? That's some truth.
It was awesome. Actually, that's going back to the very first question you asked me. I didn't think it was going to be that cool, and I didn't think that I was going to have just people that looked like me and were normal. And I quickly found out that many of us are just like college kids anywhere else. But then tons of drive, a huge support system. I was BSA president in college and got a chance to just meet some really cool Black folks that I still am close to today, and it definitely changed my life and opened a lot of doors too. So I would lean on the experience and say that it was one that I highly recommend.
Good.
Could you also talk about the importance of the down ballot and local government during this election cycle?
Yeah, touch on that a little too, but for me, it's just the reality of for the elected officials that have a smaller number of overall constituents and have a more direct connection to what you will actually see every day. They are also people that you are most likely to meet and be able to influence, because you might like just literally run into another football game or a grocery store, or just you can get involved and directly connect with their office and their work and build with them in a way that you will just never be able to do with the president and the governor. And that's just a different and a more important scenario for us to just get involved and get energetic.
Okay, this question is actually my own. I'm a physicist, a physics major, and I'm a senior, so I'm about to transition to a master's program in education. What is some advice you can give, not just to me, but other undergraduates who may be looking to go to graduate school for education, or just maybe get involved in educational policy? What is some advice that you can give us?
So, and just as you are figuring out what exactly your interest is, do that in a classroom.
Great advice. That's great. That's great. Okay.
Another question from the chat. It says, if I want to find out information on my school board member, where should I go?
So every school system does have a board or a locally elected or appointed entity that oversees the budget and many of the other functions that we talked about. Sometimes it's a little hard to find, but you should be able to Google any school system and find their board. Typically, they're odd number of members that are elected in Georgia, most are 4-year terms on staggered election seasons and cycles. Some of them are partisan. In Gwinnett County, we run partisan school board races. So I only showed up on the Democratic primary ballot and then was the Democratic nominee for the general. In many other metro Atlanta counties and systems, it is nonpartisan. Atlanta, Fulton, DeKalb, they all do nonpartisan. And the website will tell you just like who they actually are and how to contact them and when the board meetings are. By open records law, there also has to be a legal organ that the school board publicizes their meetings in. For Gwinnett County, that's the Gwinnett Daily Post. For Atlanta Public Schools, it's the AJC. There is one. Sometimes that can be a little difficult to find, but that's the best way to just be aware of like what the changes are the highlights from the previous meetings were. And then going to the meetings, which in the COVID era has in most districts moved to a live stream, but may still be a little bit more difficult now because there are some districts that didn't have the technical capacity to do so, and then they're doing the best that they can at social distancing or nothing. But figuring out where those board meetings are, they're typically one day monthly, especially in Georgia, and then just going or logging in and being present and taking notes and sending in your questions, and all of that information should be on your county school system's website.
Beautiful. So this next question is from Tristan George. What support do you believe is needed so that more male students of color will begin being interested in seeking teaching pathways throughout K through 12 education, being that only 2% of teachers are men of color?
Well, the things that are good for all teachers will be good for Black male teachers for sure. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's this conversation is a hard one to have because it's not just that there are too few Black men in the profession, as much as it also is when the Black men enter the profession, they don't stay. Like even me, right? I'm no longer a full-time teacher. And so we have to think about this from both an attraction and also a retention framework. And the retention piece is making it actually the case where your Black male teachers are affirmed. That's culture, that's the leadership setting that they're in. That's not just making them be the person that is doing all the discipline or the only leadership pathway they have is to become the dean or the AP over something that just has them doing a lot of the work with the other students of color and the problems that they're dealing with in the school. But it is creating a pathway like you would for any other teacher and making sure that they have extra support if they need it. It's because it is that important for us to have a teacher force that reflects the student force. And so I think that there's a conversation that really needs to be led and had from the systems perspective. And then there's also one just around like a policy perspective around just changing the whole thing so it's better for everybody. That will inevitably end up being the case where Black men who actually want to teach will stay because they won't be, more likely to look at the jobs that they can get with their physics degree and make triple. So if we paid teachers more, we would have a greater pool of folks to choose from, which we could then in turn hire those Black male teachers to fill necessary roles. So it's a combination of scarcity, but then also just like systemic issues that we should address with funding. But I know a lot of really bright Black men who would make amazing teachers who themselves choose not to because the profession is just not structured in a way that would make sense for them right now. And we have to change that too.
Very inspiring. I think that's all of our questions for tonight. So I guess we can wrap this up. Thank you once again, Everton, for your time, for joining us and just dropping all this wisdom on us. We would love to have you back some other time. I know you're very busy, but keep us on your radar.
Absolutely.
Yes. Once again, my name is Latrell Harris. I'm a senior physics major from Marietta, Georgia. I'm also a fellow for the Morehouse Center for Excellence in Education, and I'm hosting this with my colleague Alan Donegan. And this is our Explore Week, and also Dr. Gilbert. Thank you. We love you.
Love you all.
Pleasure to be with y'all. Be well.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you all for joining us.